Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is you're listening to this. Welcome to your weekly therapy session known as Courageous Conversations. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein, and I'd like to welcome my partner.
And I'm Dr. Philip Nelson. It sure is good to have you listening to us and listen to us gripe and listen to us address issues that we think are important to the profession, to your person, to your family.
And to the world. And we want to talk about the world today. And we're bantering around some different topics that are impacting the veterinary profession and the human world. And that is a title that we've kind of named is From One Health to None Health. And it really reflects on the changes that are going on in the leadership of human health care in Washington, and the fact that we're dealing with a very quiet pandemic that's going on with avian influenza. And so the fact that we are shrinking oversight of healthcare at a time when measles is rearing its ugly little viral head, what's going on, Phil? I mean, shouldn't we have a greater focus on healthcare and disease prevention? Don't you think we might have learned after a pandemic that was somewhat disruptive that we have to keep our finger on the proverbial pulse of the viruses and bacteria and fungi and all sorts of other things that are impacting the world, not just the veterinary world, but the world in general? Don't you think this is a time to be more focused on health instead of directing people away from the world of health?
But I'm as perplexed as you are. The simple answer is that none of this makes sense to a person who is even remotely educated in science or even in just simple hygiene. It doesn't make sense why you would take your eye off the ball during a proverbial crisis. Now, let's make sure that we establish, however, what the stated intent is for the mess that we're in, and that is that we are trying to control our national debt. We're trying to address our national debt. I don't think anyone believes that that is a sustainable amount of debt. I just think everyone questions how we're approaching it. I think if they don't, I don't understand why. Because, first of all, that debt didn't just show up on our books yesterday. A third of that debt wasn't even present until 2016 or 2020. And so this so-called emergency in addressing the debt through a two-prong attack, through tariffs as well as through cost cutting, might seem reasonable if the approach was thoughtful and surgical. But in both instances, it's as if we're laying waste and burning our bridges behind us. And when you ask me what lessons did we learn our lessons during the pandemic, my first response to that is, what lessons do you think we learned? Because there is a narrative that says that all of the lessons that were promoted during the pandemic were falsehoods, and that there is another narrative that is now out there about the pandemic, that the pandemic did not kill as many people as we thought it did, that the vaccine was not effective at all. And so that then allows us to breathe and take some space and ignore the threats of a major pathogen that is jumping across 4 species at the moment and could easily cross into human beings, particularly if it gets into pigs first. There is, or we can ignore the rising tide of the measles epidemic that's occurring in this country, regardless of what we think the cause is. What really matters are the people who are susceptible. How do we protect them if we're going to eliminate 10,000 employees in the FDA, CDC, and NIH with no regard to their expertise and simply replace them with loyalists to the present administration?
Well, and since we are veterinarians, we can specifically talk about the impact that it's having in DC, because many veterinarians lost their jobs as a result. Do still
and the question is why? Did they lose their jobs because they were incompetent? Did they lose their jobs because they weren't doing their jobs? Or did they lose their jobs simply because someone said, we have too many people working?
Well, they didn't lose their jobs for non-performance, let's put it that way. But what it does is it opens up increasing risks of importation of disease because veterinarians are very important when it comes down to checking livestock that's coming into the country through the various ports that we have. And that not only includes livestock, but it also includes companion animals that are coming in. So if we want to talk about the potential of bringing in new diseases or expanding on diseases that are not front and center, it wasn't that long ago. I believe it was about 23 years ago that we were talking about and worried about mad cow disease. And we were able to keep that reeled in.
I know. Well, we were at least able to keep it outside of our borders.
Correct. Because I happened to be in Alberta at that time, which is at the time when many of their cows, which was a major source for the outbreak, were being dealt with from that standpoint. So it has to be concerning that we are removing people from jobs of extreme importance from the FDA, Center for Veterinary Medicine, and cutting veterinarians away from their work on avian influenza, food safety, drug availability, et cetera. I mean, I know I said it a million times and I've said it, I'll say it again. It just really keeps making me feel like we're going backwards.
Yeah, well, again, the direction is immaterial to me. It is the outcome that is responsible here. And I am, I'm reminded, apparently there was Elon Musk was on the Colbert Show recently, and apparently it blew up. And Elon Musk accused Colbert of being a comedian. He said, "You're not a scientist, you're a comedian. You don't build things like I do." Well, we can use the same analogy for our president. He's not a scientist, he's a real estate agent. And running a corporation is not like running a government, no matter how you want. There are social consequences to running a government the way you run a corporation that people don't think about. It is not easy to thread the proverbial needle to protect health in a country while protecting the economy of a country. But we have to be our own best. We are our best advocates. And it's up to us to fight for our children and our grandchildren. Most of the herd immunity that we have, that you and I have, was acquired when we were in our teens and younger. I am now worried about the proliferate capacity of H5N1 and its ability to recombinate and jump species. And if we haven't learned any lessons from the last pandemic, and this is one of those diseases that we've been looking for the last 25 years. And yet I'm not sure that we're prepared to address it. I definitely am not sure that we're prepared to address it if we're going to eliminate our senior scientists in our most prestigious agencies and then replace them with, God can only hope, junior scientists or non-scientists who just happen to be loyal to an ideology rather than to science.
Well, Elon Musk and Doge, whatever you want to call it, has been the instigator of all of this. And, Robert Kennedy, Jr., Senior, whatever number he is, has been the head of the Health and Human Services with a great background in Health and Human Services, mind you, if I can tell. At least Dr. Oz has got a doctorate, but lives in Oz. So what we have in terms of leadership when it comes to healthcare is the Three Stooges.
Well, it's not just healthcare, though. I mean, we're talking about eliminating the Department of Education.
Yes.
So that we can balkanize education throughout the United States again.
Yep.
We're talking about we're talking about riding herd over human rights.
Yep.
So that we can deport people who don't think like us, whether they're one of us or not. We're talking about suppressing freedom of thought and speech, and even shipping homegrown criminals to international prisons so that we can then claim we can't get them back.
Let's add to that the decreasing in funding to some of our top educational universities who do most of our scientific research as well, which means now on top of the impact in DC, we're going to have a huge impact on the research output and outcomes that identify new disease, that come up with treatments for new disease, that help us live longer, healthier, more comfortable lives. So you've got all of these moving parts which are impacting the health of our people as well as the health of our animals.
I did not know that the agenda for this election was total disruption.
And maybe I don't think any of us thought of when all of the promises of the 2025 plan were laid out that they would actually try to do them all in the first 100 days. But we should have learned, fool me once, I'm a fool. Fool me once, you're a fool. Fool me twice, I'm a fool. We didn't learn our lesson.
Well, I wasn't fooled. I just lost the vote.
That's true. But we're still dealing with the outcome of that. And it is very concerning, because we're both scientists. I just keep focusing back on things that the medical evidence, the evidence of what is going on and what potentially could happen. And we're continuing to see a growth in the number of measles cases. We're continuing to see a growth in people who are anti-vax. I think I read somewhere that they want to register and identify all people who are on the autistic spectrum, if I'm not incorrect. So now we're even calling out people that are neurodiverse and putting them as individuals. Did you hear that as well, or am I just making things up in my own mind?
Among other things, but that is no more surprising than an autocrat who decides there are only two sexes. Again, a non-scientist who does not understand science.
It is the comfort level, by the way, having made 3 trips to Canada this year, the comfort level extends beyond our borders, or maybe I should say the discomfort level extends beyond our borders, because what we do has global impacts from a health standpoint, from a financial standpoint, and in many ways from a psychological standpoint. So we are this effort to create an isolated country, which it's what it's beginning to feel like. It has concerns for others in other countries as well.
Well, yeah, I agree. We began this discussion to discuss our concern about the impacts on One Health.
Mm-hmm.
Or the health of this nation, the health of this globe. If there's anything that we should have learned from the pandemic, was that it was a pandemic, that to isolate ourselves as a nation and think that we will be isolated from foodborne diseases of other nations is a myth. To isolate ourselves as a nation, to think that we can deal with anything this nation needs to deal with global travel, et cetera, is malarkey. And to think that we can deal with it without partners, without collaboration, to think that we have the Midas touch and that all of the ideas we need will be generated from within our own borders is so far from having been proven false that I just don't understand how we can even deal securely in that mystical arena. Everything that has been promoted through a veil of hatred or with no proof, just assertions. Every presidential order that I have read makes certain blatant assertions with no statistics, just general assertions, and then a conclusion that something is illegal and therefore we must stop it.
It's interesting, as I said, I've been traveling a bit, and it's one of the more common questions that you get is, can the president do this? And my answer to that is yes, until somebody stops him. And that's where we are now. So, by the way, I want to just note that I'm not crazy about RFK wanting an autism registry. That happened about a week ago or so, but Health and Human Services has walked back those plans. So I wasn't crazy. But just imagine everybody having to register for something. We've already started on the DEI side of things, breaking people up into little categories. Now, if you have measles or if you have autism or if you have something else, you're going to go into a registry. Again, it's creating more fractures, and it goes back to a lot of conversations we have about the polarization that we're dealing with. It's can this continue? Can we can we lead through executive order? I guess the answer to that, Phil, unless somebody pushes back, is the answer is yes.
Well, the Supreme Court has made it a lot easier for the president to use presidential directives and presidential orders until they're stopped. And we all know that it takes time for deliberation and for courts to come in with their decisions. And then that gets delayed if those decisions are either ignored or appealed, which is occurring at the same time. So the functional answer is yes, the president can do this until it is absolutely stopped, which may take years. And by that time, disruption has occurred. By that time, people have achieved what they want to achieve. And that creates a constitutional crisis for us. Of all the things that we've named, the one thing that we have not mentioned is the affront on human rights, the ability to pick up a person and ship them to a prison with no proof of a crime should frighten everyone.
Yes, well, it goes along with everything else. It is interesting how human rights have women's rights were a big issue during the election. The border was a big issue during the election, but we've gone far past that with human rights in terms of the deportation. And what I read about 3 kids under the age of 10 that were just picked up and deported, and I can't remember where it was from. But, it's getting out of hand, and it's not being done with, staying within the lane lines of the legal system. This is basically being done without due justice. And so it continues to point more and more to the autocratic direction that we seem to be heading.
That's a very nice way of putting it, but it's definitely an autocratic direction. I'm sorry, but I cannot let this conversation go without at least naming Mahmoud Khalil and Rumiesa Öztürk and Mohsen Madal, who have all been captured and imprisoned for speculative reasons. And one of them is in a Salvadorian prison after we have admitted we made a mistake. And then our president is protected by the Salvadoran president in order to continue this abuse. We should not allow this to stand. We as Americans should not allow anybody in our country to be picked up and deported or imprisoned by mistake.
Well, I want to kind of roll back to the One Health thing, because it also actually, if we go back to avian influenza, one of the claims that was an issue during the election was the cost of eggs. Now, a lot of things went up as a result of inflation, but eggs went up higher than many. Why did eggs go up so much higher, Phil? You don't have to answer that, because I will. Because the avian influenza outbreak basically led to the destruction of large numbers of egg-laying hens. Supply and demand. Supply of eggs goes down, demand remains where the cost goes up. You still have the other costs that go along with it. So we have not really addressed, if we had focused and could focus on some of the One Health issues of taking care of chickens that are at risk and getting poultry flocks back to normal, then some of the costs of eggs would normalize. But of course, if you listen to the reporting that comes out of Washington, the cost of eggs are coming down. The cost of this is coming down. It's David Copperfield redirecting away from the facts that eggs are still expensive, and eggs will continue to be expensive until we address the issues on the health side of it that have driven the cost of eggs up. So we've got so many moving parts that are impacting the economic environment that we're in. And imagine again, if we have that influenza become more zoonotic. Imagine if measles starts to get even more out of control. Now we have healthcare issues in a time and an environment where we're downsizing those people in the healthcare fields that we have greatest need for. We really are setting the world up to have some huge, uncontrollable issues. And I would suggest that it's centered in the actions that we're currently taking.
Well, I totally agree with you there. If I were to take that and pick it apart, it's amazing how much we take for granted the food production system in the United States. It's amazing that less than 100,000 veterinarians are responsible for the quality of that food. And out of that 100,000, only 15% of them actually work in that area. So why would anyone target that group for elimination of their important jobs if you truly understood the impact that that group might have? One of the reasons, back in the 60s, Khrushchev came to the United States and was very angry when he saw how food was laid out in our grocery stores. Because at that time, people stood in line for food in Russia. There was no excess of food in Russia at the time. We were upset because eggs went up in price from $4 a dozen to $10 a dozen. And yes, your supply and demand example is perfect. That's what happened. But what's more important is that we had cheap eggs, that we had the American society does not suffer from malnutrition as a result of food scarcity. It suffers from malnutrition as a result of food distribution issues. But the fact that we can get quality foods throughout our country is almost a miracle based on how we do it. But it is a machine that does that. When you and it took us a century to develop this machine. It took a century of oversight and regulations and getting rid of factories that were wrapping mice and rats in their hot dogs too. In the 19th century. We made progress doing all of that. And now we can focus on infectious diseases and infectious agents that we have to eliminate from the machine in order to guarantee safe food. And this is not something that you can see with your bare eyes. This is not something that you can allow to occur and then step in. You must prevent it. And to walk in and to eliminate the oversight is like taking the brakes off of a car and pushing it downhill.
So I want to kind of wrap up with some things and some rhetorical / non-rhetorical statements. Since we are losing people in the FDA, which is responsible for food safety, we could start to see greater cases of salmonella and E. coli. Now, Phil, you're an educator. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of the things that I'm about to say. We could see drugs, new drugs, even existing drugs, with less oversight entering into the portal for being used. So food, drugs, medical devices, cosmetics, greater impact of unapproved products, increased risk of infection if we don't take the oversight when it comes down to things like vaccinations or blood transfusions. All of these could have healthcare, which then has secondary impacts on the spread of disease between people and animals, between animals and people, which then have an impact on the market. And it really has a foreboding concern just in that one department, the FDA, of which APHIS is another department we could talk about, animal, plant, and health. All of these things will potentially have huge consequences, and we're removing the oversight. Did I do okay in capturing much of what the responsibility of the FDA is and the impact that we could be dealing with?
Well, you did okay in addressing one aspect of it. I mean, in addressing the aspect of introduction of present drugs. You didn't mention the introduction of new drugs, of the right. The safety factor for new drugs, which is also an important factor of the FDA. And we're focusing so much on the food production system and not necessarily the economy, the secondary economy.
Right.
The impact that it might have on that as well. I don't know many families who could afford to continue to pay $10 to $15 a dozen for a dozen eggs for the next year or two. Luckily, we can repopulate our flocks in 16 to 20 weeks, because of the energy within our system. But we're frustrating those people who are looking out for us. There was a 60-minute expose on avian flu, and it was devastating to watch our fellow veterinarians express their frustration in their ability to do their jobs. or express their frustration in their ability to talk about their jobs, to share their knowledge. This administration's penchant on controlling the narrative is as devastating as eliminating 10,000 workers.
So if we were to give a message to our colleagues in the veterinary field, those who are in clinical practice, those who are in research, those who are government or were former government employees, I think it's kind of hang in there. Your roles are extremely important in an environment where it's being, maybe the right term is demeaned, diminished, ignored. So I think we in clinical practice, those of you in clinical practice, have to be even more vigilant about infectious disease that you may or may not have seen before, because it's been a long time since some of us have been in school. I think we have to be supportive of our colleagues who have been ousted from positions of great significance. And I think we need to be even more vigilant of new pets that are coming in from unrecognized sources, because APHIS isn't there to inspect them at the borders, whether that's at the airports or the borders from that standpoint. So I think the veterinary profession has to kind of hunker down and come together and work together to share information and knowledge within our own profession. But I also would challenge our colleagues to educate their clients about the impact of some of the changes that are going on and how they could impact their pets, how they could impact the food supply and the medication supply, and then how it could impact themselves from an economic standpoint. I do think that this is the time when veterinarians themselves need to start to become teachers, educators, and resources for the fact that there is a very, very close connection between the human animal and the animals for whom we care.
I want to make a plea for transparency in everything that you do. It was devastating to hear a colleague who claims that she has a senior colleague in one of the government agencies who claims she has to communicate with her colleagues over encrypted media because she cannot make public the information that she has to make public. This is a democracy. It is still a democracy. And the strength of a democracy is truth. The strength of a democracy is information, not vetted information, but comparative information, information that every citizen should be able to evaluate for his or her own good. Our freedom of speech, our freedoms of choice, and our freedoms of thought are being challenged here. And it is having dire impact and effects on our economy and eventually our health.
So Phil, this has been a relatively long conversation, but it's an important one and it's an uncomfortable one. And I give you credit and I'll take some credit for being courageous enough to have these conversations. And not everybody's going to agree with us, and we understand that. But I, again, go back to our mantra, which is we encourage all of our listeners to take the lead in having these uncomfortable but courageous conversations, because only you can help control your future. And waiting for it to come to you should be really scary right now. Phil, final word.
Remember, only you can stop forest fires.
Thank you to our listeners. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Phil. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.